This episode of Now This Is Lit is brought to you by Audible. Check the link in the description to get your first Star Wars audiobook free. Everyone loves free things. Click that link. Do it. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away. You're listening to Now This Is Lit, a podcast about Star Wars books, the people who make them, and the readers who just can't get enough of them. I'm your host, Meg Dowell. I use she, her pronouns. And to celebrate the release of From a Certain Point of View, Return of the Jedi, out today as you're listening to this episode, instead of trying to interview all 40 authors, which I would love to do, but listen, there's only so many hours in the day, I decided to interview one person in particular who is the reason this book exists, is the part of the reason these books are now a trilogy and that they've been such a success and will continue to be a success. I'm here with Tom from Del Rey. So my original plan for this episode, my original plan to celebrate the release of FACPOV, Return of the Jedi, was to do like mini episodes in the 40 days leading up to the release, and then I lost my job, and there was too much happening. I could not do that, so we're doing this instead, and I think that's better for everyone. I hope you enjoy. I don't think I've ever told you what I call you or what I refer to you as when I'm talking to other people about you.
On the podcast?
Just in general,
Oh, okay.
mostly on the
'Cause
podcast.
I'm trying to think about, like, I've listened to all of your podcasts.
I don't think have I ever done it on the podcast? I don't know, but I specifically call you Tom from Del Rey. Same
No,
cadence
you have.
as
You have.
same cadence as Jake from State Farm.
No, you definitely have. I've definitely heard you call me Tom from Del Rey.
I don't know if it fits anymore because it's Random House Worlds now, but like
Technically, no. But technically also, yes.
Technicalities though.
Yes. But if that's fine. I'm grandfathered in, so you can continue that if that's what feels right.
It does feel right. It sticks, and it's like you are the only Tom from Del Rey that I will likely refer to on this podcast. So that's great for you, I guess.
I like that. It's nice.
You might get mad at me for asking you this, but I'm going to anyway. Do you know off the top of your head how many Star Wars books you've edited?
Yes, I do. It's over 50.
Ooh, that's so
over
many.
50.
That's a lot.
I think it's 52. Give me like 2 extra seconds and I can actually tell you the real answer. I believe it's 52 that I have either edited directly or been like the co-editor on, I believe. Because I was looking at this a couple of books ago, and it was it's over 50. Because I was looking at a particular book and I noted like, oh, this will be the 50th book that I this will be the 50th book that I edit.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
Mm-hmm.
That's so many Star Wars.
It's a lot of Star Wars. I mean,
Yes.
Next year it'll be 10 years. And 5 books a year over 10 years is 50 books, but we've had years where we've done more than that, and so I think it's around 50 books.
10 years is also a lot.
It's definitely a lot.
It's so cool. You're so cool, Tom. So cool.
So Rise of the Red Blade would be book 50. The 50th Star Wars book that I will have edited or otherwise contributed to in an editorial capacity. So, and I actually think that number was wrong. I think I was off by like one or two, so
Oh,
like we could say more than 50, and that is correct.
I mean, once you get past like 40, it's
That's true.
I
That's
don't
true.
know. I don't know what I'm doing. uh it's so cool that you get to do that. It's so cool that you get to do that. And it's definitely super cool that you get to work on the From a Certain Point of View books, which we call FACPOV because I'm not saying that every single time. It's easier to write it out because when you're doing an article, you have to write it out. But when I'm saying it, I can't speak that clearly for that many words in a row.
Oh,
Um,
nobody in the office says From a Certain Point of View. Everybody says FACPOV. Everybody. It's probably the book abbreviation that like everyone in the office knows, even tons of people don't really work on Star Wars. Everyone knows FACPOV because it's so ubiquitous. Nobody says From a Certain Point of View.
Sometimes people will come up with like abbreviations for other books and like they'll tweet it and I'm like, what is that abbreviation for? And they're like, oh, Princess and the Scoundrel. I'm like, but why did you call it? It's like, I don't know. This one's cool though. Man, this is the third one that we're doing. It's a trilogy now. Like I finally can put them all three of them together and they fit and they belong. And it's so cool. How does that feel to know that you've done there's a whole trilogy of these now?
It feels awesome. It still feels a little odd just because I can really think back to like the origins of it and the first time we went to do the first one and really not knowing like if people were going to really dig it and not knowing like are the authors going to really dig it and like is this actually a good idea, and I can still feel that kind of uncertainty. So even though we're at the third one and I have definitive answers to all of those anxieties and worries, I still sort of feel that like, wow, I really can't believe that we did this. And also just the breadth of them. It's just like it's 120 short stories in 5 years. Is wild. It's just wild.
I mean, based on the reactions to that day where all the story summaries and authors and things were announced, everyone was so excited. And that's the kind of energy I want with all Star Wars books. I just want everyone to be like, I don't know what this book is going to be like, but I'm here for it. That's the hope anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about these books just overall. Let's go back a little bit. Because we can do that. We can travel through time on this podcast, I guess. Because it's what we do. So I don't know the answer to this question, and you may have answered this question before, but let's get into it because we're celebrating a trilogy, and I think that's exciting. So, where did the idea come from? I can phrase that question better, but we're going to go with it. The idea of, on the 40th anniversary, you have 40 stories, 40 authors. What went into kind of like figuring out that this was a thing that could be done and that was going to be done?
So there are three inspirations ultimately behind the project. But before I get to those, I have to explain really where this very bad idea, the best bad idea ever came from. And I've told this story before, and I love telling this story, which is that prior to 2017, when we knew Star Wars was going to be celebrating its 40th anniversary, we knew we wanted to do some sort of project, some sort of special project for the anniversary. And so we were all sitting around having a conversation. It was definitely more than it was like, I think it was like in 2016. We were planning into the future, and we were like, we got to do something cool and special for the 40th anniversary. What could we do? And we had one of those really amazing, no bad ideas in a brainstorm, get all the snacks. When all the snacks are gone, get more snacks, just hours long kind of idea sharing thing. And we thought of literally everything from something as simple as like, we'll just reissue the original novelization with a brand new cover, something as simple as that, all the way up to like super complicated, like, can we do a partnership with someone and do something really ridiculous? We thought of everything. And eventually, after a lot of snacks, we came around to this idea of, let's find a way to retell the original film, retell that story in a different way than the film does. Not to change the story, but to just give us a different perspective on it, give everyone a fresh way to experience it, as if you were experiencing it the first time. And we thought about, well, okay, let's get an author then to write what I guess technically would be a new novelization of A New Hope, but let's have them do it from the perspective of all these other characters that are in the film, all these creatures and droids and people in the background of cantinas and in X-wings and Y-wings, etc., who all exist on the margins of this film that we all know and love so much, but we barely get any screen time, much less any lines from it. We're gonna have one person do this. And then somebody made a very bad joke. And they said, well, it's the 40th anniversary. We should have 40 authors do it. And then someone else was like, yeah, and we should just do 40 stories, 40 years, 40 stories. And we all burst out laughing because it was just a ridiculous notion. Like, that is too much work. That's too much. That's too much stuff. You can't do that much stuff. That's not allowed. And so we all laughed really hard for a couple minutes. And eventually we stopped laughing. We all looked at each other. And it was a light bulb sort of snap at your fingers sort of moment that was just like, oh, we have to do this now because that's actually really cool. And yeah, it's going to be really hard. And that's probably too much, but whatever. Now it's like we put the mountain in front of us. Now we got to climb that thing. And so that's where the idea came from. But like I said, it was born of three very specific inspirations, which is, when you watch Star Wars a bunch of times, it happens when you watch it the first time, but it happens once you really start to watch those movies or any movie a bunch of times, is, you have this feeling, particularly if you do it with friends, family, other people, you start sitting around and like, as the scenes are going, you just start to like provide your own commentary on the film. You start to make jokes on like what's happening at the margins of the film, because you know the story so well at that point that you are actually now luxuriating in the world that story exists in. So you're like, why is that person wearing that? And what is going on over there? And like, wait, did that stormtrooper really just hit his head on the door of the Death Star as they're running through? And we wanted to create something that allowed you to kind of capture those experiences, capture that moment of sharing and talking about Star Wars with your friends in a new way. And so that was one of the inspirations. The second is, a cool thing about an anniversary moment in a project like this is because it is new and fresh, this is something that someone who might have been celebrating 40 years of Star Wars themselves, because they were around that long, or anyone who came to Star Wars at any point in between, or was just coming to Star Wars for the first time, all of them, this is like a convergence point where all of those groups, all those generations could experience this fresh new thing together. And it's a place where like the generations and the years just kind of dissolve away. And it's this common point where everyone can kind of celebrate Star Wars together. And it's new and fresh and bold for everybody. And that was really cool. And then the last part is, when you talk about an anniversary for something like Star Wars, you're not just talking about like a cool movie or set of movies that was made. What you're celebrating with that anniversary is not just the longevity of the pictures on the screen or the music. It is ultimately the breadth of influence that thing has had on entertainment, on pop culture. And Star Wars has had such an impact across so many different industries that this was a project where we were like, we can collect people from all those. We can collect authors. We can collect comic artists. We can collect people who have been actors and actresses, who have directed things, who have written things, who have gone into journalism, and just show how much Star Wars has influenced not just writing, not just filmmaking, not just video game making, but literally every corner of entertainment and pop culture and communication that we have. So that is the long, big story behind where this amazing bad idea, which turned into a great idea, where it came from.
So is the moral of the story? The moral of the story can't be there's no such thing as a bad idea, but maybe not all bad ideas are actually as bad as we think.
Yes. Or the moral of the story is there are sometimes bad ideas, but don't say no to a bad idea because it might be hard. That's really the moral. If the only reason it's a bad idea is because it might be really difficult or you don't quite know how to do it because you've never done it before, that's not a reason to say no.
What do you think, for you specifically, is the most challenging part of putting these together?
I mean, it really is the scope of it, because you are making, even though they are short stories, it's like you are making a short story 40 times simultaneously. And so you are, everything that you are doing, you just have to do times 40. So you have to find contributors times 40. You have to organize story outlines times 40. You have to organize feedback and editorial review and helping to shape those outlines into, you know, stories, into cohesive stories, or to stories that are going to have arcs. And then once the contributors have written those, you then have to do times 40 all of the editorial review. And you have to manage the kind of interconnectivity of those stories, the overall connectivity of what happens if 10 people want to write the Admiral Akbar story kind of thing, situation. What happens if 30 people want to write a story set in Jabba's palace, but you really need to have stories that stretch across the entire film. So it's everything times 40. And then the production considerations of having 40 different individual stories all finalized and then put in a specific order and figuring out that order. It really is the scope of it. And that was a challenge for book 1, and that remained a challenge for book 2 and for book 3. And even though we got better at it each time, I know we got better at it because we kind of really had to, it still just remained this amazing lift and challenge in order to get done. That's super fulfilling, but that was really it. And then I guess you can layer on top of it, as with any series, and particularly as things go, is like the kind of expectation of it. You and I were talking about like the kind of, when the third book got announced and then we have those moments where we're rolling out the contributors and what stories they're doing, there's this real sense of joy and celebration. And I love that that is part of what I think the legacy of this series has become, these sort of communal moments of joy. But at least for me, and I know for the rest of the team, it's like there comes a pressure then of like, we got to really do these stories justice. We have to do right by these authors. We have to do right by this film. We have to do right by these stories. Because it's like, we, you know, it's great that we did it once and people loved it. Okay, it's great that we did it a second time and people loved it. It's like, but that means you got to still do it again. And that it's exciting to feel that that kind of, those stakes or that expectation is being raised each time. But it definitely informs the challenge. Absolutely does.
It does help though that so many of the authors are just so enthusiastic about it, and they're so excited about it, and they're like, each one of them, that's their one story that they have for this book is in there, and so they get to like go all in on this one thing that they did, and they're part of this huge thing, which is also exciting. But just seeing, I think one of the things I love most about book announcements and all these related things is getting to see the author reactions and getting to see them finally getting to talk about this thing that they haven't been able to talk about for so long. And even if it's been a while and they've already had their moment of excitement and I get to do this thing, but they're, you know, they finally get to celebrate that with everyone else. And especially for these books, it's really fun because you have authors supporting each other and cheering each other on. And it is something I'm really going to miss about these books, because every single time, I was mostly around for these last two, not so much for the first one, but it's so fun.
It is. And, you know, we had kept that strategy of how we announce the books and then how we announce the stories. We've sort of kept that consistent across all 3 books. And while there's probably other ways and maybe even better ways that we could have done that, one of the reasons that we kept it the way it did is because of that just moment of joy and giving all of those contributors, almost as if you were able to pull them out all on stage at like a Comic-Con or at Celebration and say, here's all 40, and they get this big ovation from a room full of people. Well, we don't really get a chance to do that, but this is the way that we get to do that in a sort of, in the virtual world. Like, this is the way we get to do that via the internet, is having this one big moment where everyone gets to shout. It's also, to share a little secret, is that the authors do not always know all of the other authors that are in the anthology with them.
Oh, that's so
and that is not because we like actually keep it secret from them. And some authors, they will ask, hey, who else is in this? And we'll share. And some of the authors certainly are friendly with each other, or they find out. In fact, I can't remember who, but I can remember a couple authors telling me like they were having some conversations with each other about like, hey, I got this little cool secret project I'm working on. I can't tell you what it is yet, but I'm excited. And another author saying the same thing, and them ultimately figuring out that they were both talking about FACPOV, which is great. But really, it's because the way that these stories get made and that certain authors join at different times, that ultimately when most of the authors usually find out the totality of the rest of the awesome company that they're in is in the day when we reveal to everybody else the awesome company that they're in. And so it becomes this amazing moment where the authors, who are all fans and cheerleaders of each other, as you said, get this moment to celebrate each other and to celebrate, oh my gosh, I'm in this book with this person who I've really admired, or this person who's my literary hero in some cases, or this person who's my really good friend, and I didn't, we didn't even have a chance to chat yet, and now we can about it. So it's one of the reasons why we've kept the announcement strategy this way, because it's just like a little bit of joy. And it's just a little bit of extra joy we can put into the world alongside the book itself.
Oh, and it works. It's wonderful. And I can't wait for, the book to actually come out and to have this other wave of everyone being excited. And it's almost here. I can't believe it. It feels like sometimes the time between like a book being announced and actually coming out like feels like it's nothing. I mean, it depends on what side of that you're on, I guess, but so you talked about briefly things that you have learned from book to book to book, kind of, as you work on things, as you work on similar projects, you learn things as you go, and you do a little bit better every time. Can you think of any of those things that you may have learned from the first book to the second book, then you were then able to kind of work into making the third one?
Definitely. There's definitely a whole bunch of like very small little administrative things about like, oh, when we ask for this thing from the authors, let's also ask for the second thing now, so we don't have to ask twice, later. It's like a lot of very simple little kind of efficiency things that you learn over time. And the number of Excel grids that we had tracking every little bit of this thing definitely increased in complexity over time, but also just got more efficient and more structured. But one of the things that I can think of in terms of kind of the scope and the creative is that getting a lot better at looking at the outlines for the stories that were coming in for this particular project, and being able to go back to an author and say, this is really cool, but this is actually just like a 2-sentence outline. It's not actually a story, which because these are shorter stories, the outlines for them, some of them were still about a page long or so, but many of them might just be a paragraph, because, if you're writing a 3,000 word story, you don't need to write a 3,000 word outline, right? Your outlines and your manuscripts are going to be relevant to each other based on the length. And so some of the outlines would be very short, 2 or 3 sentences, and definitely got better over time at being able to say to an author, this is a really great kernel of a story, but if you look at that, what you're going to realize is after about 3 paragraphs, you're going to run out of story. And so how can we take this and layer something else in? What can we add another turn to it? Can we add another beat to it? This is great, but this is only going to get you about 800 words of runway. It might look like you can get 2,000, but actually you'll kind of just be regurgitating the joke, or you'll have made the awesome point for the character, or the character will have had their little arc, but there won't be anywhere to go. And I think between the first and the second one, we really got a little better at honing in on that. And that wasn't to say that it ended up with any problematic stories in the earlier ones, but definitely by the time we got to Return of the Jedi, it was almost just like immediately being able to be like, I can totally already see the speed bump coming, and let's talk about how we move around those. So that's definitely probably a big thing. Was definitely that. I think we also got better at ordering the stories, especially because Empire and Return of the Jedi are really challenging in terms of their chronology, and that made ordering the stories in the second and third anthology much more challenging. But by the time we got to this one, I think we went and reordered. I actually was looking back at it the other day. We reordered the stories in the Empire Strikes Back anthology 7 times. Okay. We only had to reorder the stories in this anthology 3 times, and even in those 3 times, most of the stories never moved, or they like swapped positions with like the story right after it or something like that. And I think we just got better at understanding how to order these, particularly when you get to a section of the film where like 4 scenes are intercutting each other. So you don't have those really simple signposts to be like, well, this happens before this and this happens before this, so here's the order. A New Hope is like perfectly balanced like that. It was like really easy to just order things. But these other 2 movies, not so much. So definitely learned some valuable lessons there, which saved us a lot of extra A lot of extra reorderings, which I know our production team was happy about because I did not send them a million emails being like, "Can we just move these 5 stories around again? Like, I know we've done this 3 times, but just we're not there yet."
Yeah. What goes into kind of when you have that situation where the order doesn't necessarily go by what the timeline is? Like when you have to choose, like these two could go either way. Like, how do you decide that?
There's a collection of things. We sort of created this framework because that way we could just kind of churn through it. So the first thing you do is just like, if it's clear that where the story starts, that's just the starting order. Obviously, A New Hope has to start with the scenes on the Rebel blockade runner. You're not going to start with a Death Star run story, right? Because you're just following the film. If they're really close, we would if there were stories that were really close, we'd look at where the 2 stories ended. And if one went past the other or its breadth was really much wider, for example, in The Empire Strikes Back, there's a bunch of stories that take place over the entire arc of the Hoth scenes. But there's a couple of stories that only take place within like 2 or 3 minutes on Hoth. And so in those, we would use that as the kind of tiebreaker to kind of fit those with each other. And along with that, the sort of last tiebreaker was we would actually drill down not just to an individual scene, but we might drill down to like a single line of dialogue or a single physical moment to be like, I know this story goes across the entire Hoth battle, but the crux of this story is actually the moment that guy walks between Han and Leia holding the box. So the box boy story has to go early because that scene, that actual moment happens 5 minutes into the movie, right? And so we do that. And then once we had kind of once we had them, we would just read it again, and then we'd kind of take a gut feeling of like, does this seem right? Does this feel right? Does this make sense? And we would read and we would make tiny final adjustments of like, you know what? These 2 are so close together, and actually if we flip-flop these, we will break up like 5 Imperial POVs in a row, which we actually think just like makes a little more sense for just the flow of reading. And so we'd make these very tiny last minute adjustments. That's just based on like the instinct of the editors reading and everyone reading and just being like, does this feel right? It feels better to, learn this story before that story, right? Make those small adjustments. And then you just, at some point, you let go. You just stop doing it. Just stop tinkering with it, because at some point you would, you'd just start to unravel the knot, right? If you just kept being like, oh, let's do it again. But yeah.
Sounds so fun.
It was, and a lot of just really meant that like I had all the movies just playing on DVD or Disney Plus or whatever, pretty much just permanently for long stretches of time, just be looping them in order to get it right.
I love that. Oh, I love it. How do you think these anthologies will shape the future of Star Wars storytelling?
Oh, wow. Just a real easy question there.
I'm not even sorry about
it. That's okay. No, this is an awesome question. I hope that they continue to serve as entry points for voices and people who will be able to make larger impacts on the Star Wars galaxy, and who will be able to tell other stories, who will be able to go on and do arcs of comics, or write audio originals, or write full novels, or write trilogies, or contribute to big series like the High Republic. And I say all of that very hopeful, but also because that has all already happened. We've already been so blessed that one of the great gifts that this series has given us is all of these new voices who can come and tell not just another Star Wars story, but tell their Star Wars story. That wasn't possible before because we didn't have their voice. We didn't have their experience. We didn't have their perspective and their connection to the saga, which again goes back to being able to celebrate the influence that Star Wars has had. So it was always a really important thing in collecting contributors and finding people to contribute to this, to make sure that we were bringing new voices into Star Wars. And I really hope that folks who've contributed across all 3 of these anthologies will continue to be able to do so into the future. And I also like kind of, it's a slight inverse of that, but I hope too that a lot of folks who read Star Wars books, who read these, who maybe have never heard of some of these authors before, find authors that they can embrace and fall in love with, not just for their Star Wars content, but maybe you find, you know, the original novel that an author who wrote one of your favorite FACPOV stories actually wrote, or that comic run that they've done for Marvel or whomever, that you suddenly find yourself picking up because you recognize the name from the, you know, the title of one of these anthologies. I'm hoping too that it works both ways there, that readers have discovered things that push them out beyond to new types of storytelling, but then also that, you know, we get to bring some of these authors back to do more stories in other capacities with Star Wars, because there's a lot of amazing voices. There's so many people that I go back and I look at the covers of these books and I'm like, I cannot believe that person said yes. I cannot believe we got to make a story with X. I cannot believe that, you know, this person came to play in the Star Wars sandbox with us. And so I hope that many of them come back, you know, across every format imaginable, and continue to help enrich the galaxy, because it's really great, and because ultimately too, this entire project is about the authors and the contributors. This project, you know, we talked about the origin of it and this idea in the editorial room, but like ultimately this project doesn't exist really without the creative generosity of the contributors. Because ultimately we had this kind of idea of, oh yeah, 40 stories, 40 years, 40 different POVs. But it wasn't until we put that in the hands of the first group of contributors that they made it real as to like what this really could be, what the potential for this could be. And then that second group of contributors picking up the ball from the first group and being like, oh, we can tell those kinds of stories, and taking what they did and building on top of it and saying, let's get weirder, let's get wilder, let's get more inventive. And then to have this third group of contributors come along and not just say, great, we're going to build off of what all of you did, but we're also now going to tell FACPOV stories that are in conversation with previous FACPOV stories, that are, you know, thematic or direct pickups and sequels to previous FACPOV stories, that are not just celebrating the anniversary of this Star Wars film, but are celebrating the anniversary of this book trilogy. And so that is why I'm so hopeful and want so dearly for so many of these contributors to hopefully be able to continue to contribute in Star Wars, because they've sort of already been doing that, and it's been so lovely and so amazing. And I just remain kind of flabbergasted by their accomplishment across the whole series.
It's amazing. And it's amazing that I forget sometimes certain authors who have a book coming out have done one of these stories in a previous installment. And I'm like, so I'll be doing research for an interview and I'm like, oh, right. You started with one of these short stories and now here you are. It's really cool. It's really cool to see how that happens, and how an author might come in and they're like, I'm going to do this smaller short story. And then it just evolves into, I'm just going to write Star Wars forever. Hopefully, maybe. So cool.
I would be totally fine with that. I would totally fine with that.
Well, the time has come. The book, as you're listening to this, is finally here. It's exciting, and start reading now because it might take a minute. I do highly recommend the audiobook though. Started that today. It is wonderful. As all of them are. Star Wars audiobooks are always good. So you talk a little bit more about the behind the scenes kind of making of these in your newsletter. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Sure. So it wasn't quite because of this series, but it sort of it definitely served as a catalyst for it. Plus, a bunch of the authors affectionately bullied me into doing it by encouraging me. But I started a newsletter called The Cubicle at the End of the Galaxy on Substack, and its first couple entries from the last few weeks and this week are very much about how does this anthology series get made, diving into some of the topics that we talked about, but also touching on things that we haven't, about how this got made, how we found authors, stories, all sorts of funny statistics and things just because I get interested in weird statistics.
Mm.
And I'm going to wrap that up this week with some suggested story pairings across the trilogy based on themes and characters and some other stuff. But then after that, the goal of the Substack newsletter is to make it a space to not just tell stories about behind the scenes of books that I've worked on, but just talk about being a book editor, talk about working in publishing, not just Star Wars specifically, but writ large, help demystify and just share experiences about working in the book industry. Because one, I have a lot of stories and I think a lot of them are interesting, but also as someone who entered the book industry without a resource like this and without a lot of insight into the simple questions like, what does a book editor do? I was like, well, maybe I should try and help create a resource for stuff like that. And along the way, tell some fun stories, and explain why like Bucky Barnes is probably a liar in The Falcon and the Winter Soldier when he says he read The Hobbit when it came out in 1937. That's going to be the topic of one of my future entries. He's definitely probably a liar, but that's okay. So yeah, it's Cubicle at the End of the Galaxy on Substack, and it's totally free and everything like that. I couldn't imagine charging people for it because I don't think that the information, I think it's interesting, but I don't think it's interesting enough for people to have to pay for it. So come check it out if you're inclined about either this series or just books and stuff in general.
It's a good idea, and I'm glad you were talked into it.
Definitely talked and not coerced. No, but I actually am already really enjoying it. It's a fun thing to be able to have a draft open throughout the week, and on my lunch breaks or after work when the muse hits me to like clack away for a few minutes at like a funny anecdote or something and like build up a newsletter.
Thank you so much for doing this. I couldn't figure out exactly how I wanted to celebrate the release of this book, what I wanted to do for an episode, and this just seemed like the perfect way to do it. So thank you so much for joining me finally. I wanted to have you on forever, and we finally did it. Look at us.
Yeah, this was great. This was so nice. I so appreciate the invitation. I love the show. And, anytime you want me back, I will be happy to come talk about books.
Yay. I will hold you to that.
Now This Is Lit is part of the Faraway Fandom Network. It is produced by Devor Mondum and written, hosted, and edited by me. Jose Jimenez designed our podcast art. Keep up with the show on our Substack at starwarslitpod.substack.com and find the show wherever you get your podcasts. For more book reviews and Star Wars Book Celebration, follow Star Wars Book Reviews on Instagram.